Joining us now, my old House colleague, former chairman of the Intelligence Committee on the House side of things on Capitol Hill, Pete Hoekstra. Pete, you heard the president today. What do you make of his somewhat dismissive comments about, well, these guys could end up back on the battlefield?
Well, you got a couple of things there, JD. Number one is he couldn't say anything other than that because with the people who have been identified as being much lower risk of going back to the battlefield and being released from Gitmo, the percentages after 12 to 18 months, about 30% of them find their way back onto the battlefield. It doesn't mean that 70% haven't returned to the battlefield. It just means that we really don't know where those 70% are. They could have gone back to the battlefield. We just haven't been able to verify. So the president, actually, he told us the truth today. These guys, there's a probability that they'll go back onto the battlefield, and actually with these five, there's a high probability that they will go back to the battlefield.
Which prompts this question concerning the Taliban five, Pete. Any way we can keep track of these guys now they've been released?
Well, that's interesting. I've traveled to countries when I was on the Intelligence Committee where they've gone back to third country, host countries, and where they were under surveillance. And remember, these were people who were identified as not being at high risk of going back on the battlefield. It's a very, very intensive operation. Most of the time it's not 24/7, but these folks had to check in, once a week or something like that. But a host government can't track them 24/7. We're not going to be able to track them 24/7. The other thing is these guys are going to be in a very favorable environment. If they want to talk to the Taliban leadership or the Taliban leadership wants to come meet with them, they'll have the opportunity to do that. They don't necessarily have to leave Qatar over the next 12 months. And as I understand the agreement, it's, hey, they'll stay in Qatar for 12 months. After that, they can go wherever they want. That's when we lose total control of them.
Pete, we are hearing more today from soldiers who served with Bo Bergdahl. They say he was a deserter. They point out that soldiers from his own unit died trying to track him down. So how does the calculus of trading one American, Bo Bergdahl, for five high-level terrorists add up?
Well, I think for many of us it doesn't add up. And, that is something that is now going to have to go through a legal process through the military. If he did desert, if he did, violate the conduct within the military that he was established that he was held accountable for, I expect that now the military will hold him accountable. And if that's why this thing has been so very, very messy. This is not someone who was shot down flying support missions for the military, as what we saw in Vietnam, or bombing runs, and who were then held captive for 3, 4, 5 years. This was a guy who, it appears, and all the information seems to indicate, left his post and put himself in a position where capture was going to be very, very likely.
Pete, in retrospect, does the so-called accidental release of the name of the top CIA operative in Afghanistan figure into this deal at all? There's an undercurrent of buzz surrounding that whole curious development prior to this release.
Well, that's interesting, and as you and I talked about this earlier today, I went back and I checked with some of my colleagues in the intelligence community, and also reflected back on some of my experiences when I was there. That does happen on occasion, and here's the possible scenario where there could have been a linkage. I'm assuming that the station chief knew about the negotiations, knew that this release was, that this transfer of prisoners was going to take place. My guess is that he would have been very, very opposed to the release. He would have known the background of the five folks, the Taliban five. He may have even helped to put them into Gitmo. He would have known all the circumstances behind Bergdahl. And so, he was probably very, very opposed to the release. And to make it a little bit cleaner, for the president that when he's in Afghanistan, rather than having this guy around protesting and voicing his opposition to this, the easiest way to make sure that he's kind of kept quiet or he's moved out of Afghanistan is to leak his name. It has happened in the past where an administration has used somewhat similar means to quiet critics. So it's a possibility. Whether that's what happened in this case, at this point in time, you and I are only speculating. We don't know.
Pete, one thing we do know is there is some disagreement as to whether or not the president broke the law in terms of his requirement to inform Congress 30 days in advance about this kind of prisoner trade. Now, it's interesting. In the media yesterday, a couple of left-leaning lawyers, CNN's Jeffrey Toobin and law professor Jonathan Turley, say the president, in fact, broke the law. Yesterday, for all intents and purposes, you said that by your lights, he really didn't. Have you reassessed that thought today in light of what some of the attorneys have to say?
Well, I think there were yesterday. You also had Fred Fleitz on, who's the analyst, the expert analyst from Lignit, who maybe said it a little bit more clearly than what I did, in stating that what happened there is that perhaps the president violated the law, but most likely the law would have been found, these laws that he would have violated would be found to be unconstitutional, and that the Congress cannot put those kinds of limitations onto the president. That might be a clearer interpretation of how I feel that, sure, there may be laws that say, hey, you got to notify us 30 days in advance, but if those laws are tested in the courts, they may be found to be unconstitutional.
Fair enough, Pete. We thank you for the clarification. Some other stories that merit your comment. First of all, the report yesterday that the National Security Agency is pulling tons of images from around the web for facial recognition programs. Should everyday American citizens be concerned about this report?
No, I'm assuming, again, the NSA has a mission overseas. It's their responsibility to, gather intelligence overseas. If they're gathering images for facial recognition purposes, their mission is to do it for foreigners. It's for doing it outside the United States. They should not be capturing and filing facial recognition capabilities for Americans or for anybody in the United States. That would be outside of their charter, outside of their mandate, and they'd be violating the law.
A couple of moments remain here, Pete. I want to shift the focus back overseas, specifically Nigeria. You and I were talking about the abduction of hundreds of schoolgirls there in Nigeria. There was a suspicion that Boko Haram had infiltrated the Nigerian intelligence and military apparatus, and indeed a major court-martial in Nigeria just reported on. Do you have some more information on that for us?
Well, I mean, it pretty much proves everything that you and I were talking about 2 weeks ago. We talked about that most likely the Nigerian military was infiltrated by Boko Haram. It appears that they were. It explains why for almost a month the Nigerian government didn't ask for any help. It also explains why these girls are still missing. It's very hard for the U.S. or any other Western country that has the capabilities that could actually maybe find these girls, as hard as that's going to be, and perhaps rescue them. They really don't have a capable ally in the Nigerian military to work with. It's just a very, very ugly situation. And the further out we go, the less likely is that we're going to get all of these girls back.
Well, it's a tough note to end on, but we ask you for an unvarnished assessment, and when you offer your intelligence brief, Pete, we have to take the tough news with the good news. Pete Hoekstra, as always, we appreciate your incisive analysis. Take good care. Now, stay with us. When we come back, more U.S. troops could be headed to Europe. Plus, a football legend sues the NFL. And we want to get your comments on the whole release of the Taliban 5, of the curious actions of Bo Bergdahl. You can write us. You can tweet us specifically. Why don't you tweet me your comments at NewsmaxTV, hashtag America's Forum. There's also email, connect@newsmaxtv.com, or visit us at Facebook, facebook.com/Newsmax. We are coming right back on America's Forum.